Hello, I'm Dr. John Kavanaugh, also State Senator John Kavanaugh. This is Lesson 6, Part 1 in our course on the state legislatures. This lesson is on passing a law. All right, the process of passing. Hello, I'm State Senator John Kavanaugh, and welcome back. This is Lesson 6, Passing a Law, Part 1. And by the way, this is Part 1 of the lecture of Passing a Law, Part 1 of the course. So let's begin. Now, the process of passing laws in all states is very similar to that used in the U.S. Congress. And that's because the original 13 states modeled themselves after the U.S. Congress. And many of the states that were added later on also modeled themselves after the U.S. Congress. Some of the additional states were breakaway states from existing states, like West Virginia, who also modeled themselves after the U.S. Congress. And a lot of the territories that became states, they had to have a structure while they were territories dictated by the federal government, and that structure was similar to the Congress. So that's why all the states have extremely similar processes. But there are differences between the states, and you will even find differences between chambers in the same states, usually with respect to certain rules, procedural rules. Now, passing a bill, law, is a grueling and complicated process with a lot of opportunity for death. There are numerous steps where either a bill might not be heard because the chamber leader or committee chair doesn't want to hear it, or it dies in committee. It's a complicated process. And by the way, it's repeated in both chambers in 49 states. Only one state, Nebraska, has only one chamber. All the other states have two chambers. So, grueling process. And the complexity and the ease at which bills can die was born of the founding fathers' mistrust of government. They feared government. They thought government can do a lot of harm. So they made it really hard for government to pass something, change the law. So there's a preference for a slow and deliberative process in the federal government and in all the states. Now, where did the law come from? In other words, we're not talking about the law of how we operate, but when somebody proposes a law in a legislature, where did it come from? Well, lawmakers very often will have their own ideas and desires, and they will write a law. A lot of government agencies will come and request that bills be written for them. There are interest groups, sometimes called special interest groups, that represent different groups, businesses, political groups, what have you. The American Heart Association is a special interest group that promotes healthy heart legislation. There are political groups, conservative, liberal groups. Excuse me. Sometimes the legislature will get a hold of model legislation. Model legislation is legislation written often by political groups, and they write it in a very generic manner so that it can be introduced in almost any state with just minor modifications so it conforms to the style of the particular state that it is being run in. Other states are sources of legislation. There is a national organization, the National Council of State Legislatures, which I'm a member. I used to be on the board, and all the states belong to it. And they maintain a database of all of the bills that were run or failed in all of the states. And this goes back decades. So if you're interested in writing a new law on any topic, you can do a topic search and you can come up with usually many laws that were either proposed or passed by other states. Excuse me. And that saves the time of having to reinvent the wheel every time. Sometimes laws are run to conform to federal law or court rulings. The states get a lot of money from the federal government for various things, healthcare, the environment, and criminal justice. And very often the federal government will put restraints or requirements on the money they give us. So if the federal government changes those constraints or requirements to keep the flow of cash, we very often have to change the state law. Excuse me. Or there could be a court ruling. A court could rule that a law is unconstitutional, and then theoretically you would remove it from the books. Although in practice, if it is a controversial law, sometimes there will not be enough votes to remove it from the books. For instance, the Supreme Court basically legalized abortion under Roe v. Wade, but Arizona, being a pro-life state way back then, never removed its prohibition on abortion because the lawmakers didn't want to be on the record. And that happens in other areas too, so it's not unusual. And of course, there is also the need to correct problems with previously passed laws. I mean, sometimes you pass a law and then it's in effect, and all of a sudden, whoa, there's a real problem. It doesn't work, or it's doing an unintended negative consequence, and you have to come back next session and correct the law. And finally, some laws are reruns. They were ran in past sessions and they failed for whatever reason. Now, if the bill failed at the very end because there wasn't enough time, that's a bill that's almost always going to be reintroduced the next session. But sometimes lawmakers will introduce bills that failed because there weren't the votes, figuring that in a new legislature there are new members and maybe there are enough votes then. So there are a lot of different reasons why you would do a rerun, but they happen. Okay, so let's look at these in particular. Lawmakers. Lawmakers will often see the need for a law on the news or elsewhere. Many of the time I've read something in the newspaper or saw something on cable TV, and I said, wow, that's crazy. There ought to be a law. I can do something about that. Or maybe I hear about a law somewhere else, and I say, hey, that's a great law. I want to pass it. So I do a lot of laws based on something which I read about or see. So lawmakers themselves sometimes come up with ideas. Government agencies. Government agencies require laws to allow them to perform their functions legally and democratically. Agencies just can't do whatever they want. They have to be within the authority and boundaries of the law. And many of these functions are very complex, so they often come to us and say, we need a new law, or we need this law to be changed, or this law no longer is needed. There are also government auditing agencies, and they also generate bills. These are like accountants, and they audit agencies, and they don't just audit for money flow. They will also sometimes see if the agency is doing everything that's supposed to do, if they're doing things in a timely manner. And sometimes these auditing agencies come up with recommendations saying that you need to change the law to prevent this bad thing from happening, or to allow them to do something more quickly, or what have you. There are also interim legislative committees. Sometimes a matter is too complex and there's too much research and too much stakeholder meetings needed to get it finalized in the short period of time that most legislatures are in session, which is usually 4 to 6 months a year. So they will sometimes do an interim committee, and the interim is the period between when the legislature meets. So then if the legislature adjourns in June and comes back in January, the interim is that period of June through January. And they will sometimes have committees that meet and attempt to do a deep dive into an issue, have stakeholder meetings, and they will sometimes come up with recommendations for laws. Money bills. There's never enough money to go around, and the budget is a zero-sum game, and government agencies are always coming asking for money. I have usually been the approach chair more often than not in whichever chamber I was in, and I have a long procession of government officials who come into my office saying they need money for this, that, and the other thing, and they make their pitch. But again, there's never enough cash to go around, and it's a zero-sum game. If you give a lot to one, you have to give less to another. Now, another source of law are interest groups, and these are individuals or groups of people who get together to promote, as their name implies, their own interest. They can be small groups or they can be large groups. The National Rifle Association is a large interest group that promotes gun rights. A small local environmental group concerned about, a pond in their community, they could be a small interest group. And interests can revolve around political, social, economic, environmental, or cultural matters. And they can be, again, big or small. Interest groups advance their agenda by getting laws passed, including budget bills that appropriate money for their cause. By the way, interest groups will also try to kill bills that they think harms their cause. The bigger interest groups that are well-funded will employ either their own lobbyists or hire contracted lobbyists to represent them. Interest groups will try to get a lawmaker to sponsor the needed bill and then help shepherd that bill through a lengthy legislative process. It's always good to have an interest group come to you and say that they support your bill and they're going to lobby for it, because they do a lot of the hard work of talking to all the members, especially committee chairs, to get the bill heard. Some interest groups grade legislators based upon their votes. They will select certain key bills related to their special interest, and they will give you points, either positive or negative points, depending on if you vote for or against their bill. And usually they will give you a number grade based on 100, or sometimes a letter grade. It's just like school. And a lot of lawmakers are particularly concerned to get a proper rating from groups that their constituents like. I have always had an A+ rating from the National Rifle Association because I'm a conservative Republican, and my constituents, they're very big on Second Amendment rights. By the same token, I get very low ratings from some of the liberal groups, but that's okay because, in a sense, that's good for me too when my constituents see that. And it's the reverse for liberal Democrats. But by the way, giving letter grades can if it's an interest group that is able to publicize their grades to their members, and they have a lot of members in the district, they can have great influence on the way legislators vote. They also will lobby public support for the bill that they wish to see passed. And when they lobby public support, they may be urging people to write their legislator or contact their legislator and say, vote for the bill. So in a situation like that, that helps bills even more. And they also may broker compromises to get votes needed for passage. But of course, if they're going to broker a compromise, they have to have the permission of the legislator who's sponsoring the bill. All right, and constituents. Constituents are the lawmakers' bosses. They're the ones who elect us. And lawmakers need constituents to vote for them to remain in office. Constituents usually represent personal interests, and their requests are generally less complex. Many of the constituent bills that I run are HOA bills, where their HOA, Homeowners Association, is preventing them from doing something like flying two flags or might be something with lights on their house. A lot of them are also license plate bills. Special groups like to have specialty license plates that promote their group. To do that in Arizona, they have to get $10,000 and they give it to the Department of Transportation to design the plate. And then people can buy that license plate and they pay an extra amount. And the extra amount helps defray the cost of printing the plate, and some of the money goes to the group as like a charitable contribution. So there are all sorts of plates. There's pet plates that support the Spay Neuter Fund and support the police plates that give money to like police widows and what have you. So a lot of different plates, and they all need bills to become law. A really popular plate that I passed was the home baked food bill. The disabled lady came to me many years ago and said that she wanted to bake cookies in her home, but that the Board of Health said that because she didn't have a restaurant-grade certified stainless steel kitchen, she couldn't do that there. That didn't make too much sense to me, and I contacted the state health director who at one time was the head of the Maricopa County Food Inspection Service. And he said that that was ridiculous, that every night millions of people in Arizona eat meals prepared in home kitchens and they're not dying. And besides, cookies are not hazardous food that spoils quickly. So I passed a law that said that people could bake cookies and stuff at home for resale. You know, they had to package them and label them and say they're home baked. And they also needed to get a food handler's card, which is very easy to get. It costs like $10 if you take a short course and a test so that you don't, like, you know, do horrible things with food and make people sick. I do a lot of bills on, like, first responder flags was an HOA bill that I did where some of them wanted to fly flags honoring the police, and the HOA said no. That became complicated because I had to word it in a way that they couldn't do controversial police flags, like that was during the Black Lives Matter movement. So there was a Black Lives Matter chant that the people on that side of the controversy were involved with, and then police supporters wanted to have Police Lives Matter, which the Black Lives Matter people thought was insulting and demeaning to their cause. So to get the home first responder flag bill to require HOAs to let people fly them if they wanted to, I had to just make a generic description of the flag and the symbols and the colors, and that they could only include certain words like like support, police, sheriff, honor, what have you. It gets complicated. Constituent requests can sometimes be controversial and undoable. Sometimes people ask for some really off-the-wall stuff, and they become problematic when the legislator disagrees with what the constituent wants or knows the bill could never pass. And then you got to try to, gently tell the constituent you can't do it. Although some people lie and say they will and then just never do it. I don't think that's a great strategy. A final variation of the constituent bill is the red meat for the base bill. Some legislators will introduce highly partisan, very conservative, if Republican, very liberal, if Democrat bills to please their political base, which are the very activist members who tend to be more liberal if Democrat, more conservative Republican, even though they know that these bills have little chance of passing. They do it to score points for themselves, with the constituents. All right, I'm going to end part 1 of this lecture right now, and we will pick it up at part 2.